You picture a royal palace at dusk, its windows glowing faintly against the London fog. Inside, there's luxury. Silk curtains, polished floors, corridors steeped in centuries of tradition. Yet, just beyond those ornate doors, a scandal waits, whispering through the shadows. You're about to step into one of the most damaging controversies ever to touch the British monarchy: Prince Andrew's association with Jeffrey Epstein. This isn't just gossip or tabloid chatter, it's a story where allegations, power, and reputation collide in ways no fairy tale crown could shield. You remind yourself immediately, Andrew has never been criminally charged in connection to Jeffrey Epstein, and the allegations against him remain unproven in court. Still, the fallout from simply being linked to Epstein, a convicted sex offender, left stains that no settlement could fully erase. And before we go further, welcome to 102 Hours, your late-night corner for true crime and mysteries, told gently in a voice you can drift with. If you're listening in bed, tuck yourself under the covers. If you're on a quiet walk, notice how the world softens when you lean into a story. Go ahead and like, subscribe, and drop your current location and local time in the comments. I love seeing how far across the globe we keep each other company in these hours. Tonight, we're peeling back layers of scandal, privilege, and silence. And, as always, we walk carefully, respecting survivors, clarifying what's proven, and never rushing to conclusions that courts never made. So, let's rewind. You're in the late 1990s, a time when glittering charity galas and polo matches defined much of Prince Andrew's public life. The Duke of York, second son of Queen Elizabeth II, carried both privilege and pressure. He had served in the Royal Navy during the Falklands War, once earning the nickname Randy Andy from tabloids for his romantic escapades. Quirky fact: at one point he was rumored to be Princess Diana's favorite dance partner, an image far lighter than the storm to come. It's here, amid New York's high society whirl, that Andrew is introduced to Jeffrey Epstein. The financier already moves in elite circles, hosting parties in Manhattan mansions and private islands, and surrounding himself with the rich, the famous, and the powerful. Epstein's allure wasn't just money, it was access. He made people feel they were part of something exclusive. To a prince used to exclusivity, the friendship didn't seem unusual at the time, but investigators still question whether Andrew ignored early warning signs. By the early 2000s, whispers followed Epstein, unsettling enough that some distanced themselves. Yet Andrew stayed connected. In fact, he was photographed with Epstein in Central Park in 2010, after Epstein's conviction for soliciting a minor. That image, the prince walking casually beside a convicted sex offender, stunned the public when it surfaced. Why, people asked, would a senior royal stay linked to a man already branded with such crimes? The palace tried to dismiss concerns. Andrew was a trade envoy, they said. He met many people in his role. But you notice the contrast. Once, his duties gave him access to power. Now, those same connections put him under suspicion. Mainstream fact? By 2011, British newspapers reported that Buckingham Palace staff were deeply uneasy with Andrew's friendship with Epstein, and senior officials urged him to cut ties. And yet, the friendship lingered. According to acquaintances, Andrew even stayed in Epstein's New York townhouse in 2010, a visit critics later called staggeringly reckless. In that same townhouse hung rows of photographs, powerful men and women smiling beside Epstein. The walls themselves seem to keep a record of who entered. You sit with that detail for a moment. A royal bedroom in Buckingham Palace, centuries old. A townhouse in Manhattan, lined with unsettling photographs. Two worlds, yet one scandal ties them. It's a reminder that no title, no crown, can insulate you completely when choices come back to haunt. The story of Andrew and Epstein didn't explode overnight. It built quietly, piece by piece, as photographs, documents, and testimonies surfaced. You can almost hear the ticking of a clock, the sound of years passing. of investigations circling closer, of a prince walking deeper into shadows he might never fully escape. And in this first chapter, you recognize the uneasy truth. The Duke of York was not accused of Epstein-esque crimes directly at the start. Instead, his downfall began with proximity, being seen beside the wrong man at the wrong time and not stepping away when he could. You picture a spider spinning its threads, not in a dark forest, but in Manhattan penthouses, Caribbean islands, and Palm Beach mansions. The spider is Jeffrey Epstein, and the strands aren't silk but connections: financial, political, royal. If Andrew was a prince walking into shadows, Epstein was the one weaving them, binding people into a network that looked dazzling from the outside and sinister when viewed up close. Epstein's background wasn't aristocratic. Born in Brooklyn in 1953, he rose through cleverness, charm, and an uncanny ability to sell himself. He left college without a degree, yet by the late 1970s he had taught mathematics at an elite prep school in Manhattan. Quirky tidbit: he once taught the son of Bear Stearns' chairman, a coincidence that launched him into finance. Soon after, Epstein joined Bear Stearns, and within a few years, he was managing money for the ultra-wealthy. But wealth wasn't Epstein's only currency. Influence mattered more. He cultivated friendships with scientists, Hollywood stars, politicians, and royalty. His address book, later seized by investigators, was filled with names that made journalists' jaws drop. It wasn't about one or two famous friends. It was about hundreds. And he knew how to make people feel indebted to him, offering private jets, lavish homes, and introductions to others in his orbit. This is where Prince Andrew enters the web. Key, he wasn't the only notable figure, but his royal title made headlines louder. Epstein, already convicted by 2008 for sex crimes involving minors, should have been radioactive socially. Yet his network endured, and Andrew's continued presence shocked the public. You imagine the photo again: a royal walking in Central Park with a man already branded a predator. It was as though Epstein-A.'s web was sticky enough to hold on to even those who should have known better. Investigators still question whether Epstein maintained leverage over people, whether his sprawling connections were insurance policies as much as friendships. Theories circulated. Did he keep compromising photographs, secret recordings, or documents? Officially, much of this remains speculation, and U.S. authorities have never released a so-called client list. In fact, in July 2025, the FBI and DOJ declared there was no credible evidence such a list existed. But the whispers haven't gone quiet. Mainstream history fact: Epstein's address book, revealed in court proceedings, contained contact information for royalty, billionaires, and politicians, including multiple British aristocrats and former U.S. presidents. Many contacts never faced accusations, but their names in the book were enough to fuel suspicions. For Andrew, being part of Epstein's world was catastrophic. In some circles, it meant access to American business leaders. In others, it meant guilt by association. The British press dubbed it toxic. Within Buckingham Palace, aides fretted that the Duke of York's judgment was compromised. You think about it in everyday terms. Imagine someone you know is caught hanging around with a convicted felon. You'd probably raise an eyebrow, maybe back away. Now multiply that by 1,000. Because this isn't your neighbor. This is a man sixth in line to the throne, photographed alongside someone whose crimes horrified the world. And here's a detail that sounds almost absurd. Epstein liked to brag that his Caribbean estate, Little St. James, was so private he called it the Island of Secrets. Guests allegedly came and went, ferried on helicopters and yachts. Whether Andrew visited that island is contested. Flight logs don't confirm his presence there, and Andrew himself denies it. But the very rumor was enough to fuel scandal. The power of Epstein's web wasn't just who he knew, it was how he made people question what others knew. Did the prince see something? Did he suspect? Why didn't he step away? The longer he stayed, the more trapped he appeared. As the 2000s passed, Epstein's influence waned in public but grew in infamy. Arrested again in 2019, he died in jail that same year, officially ruled a suicide. That event tore open the web, forcing names back into headlines, and Prince Andrew's was among the loudest. You can almost feel the threads tightening around Andrew at this point. Once, Epstein's connections seemed like opportunities. Now, they were shackles, holding him to a man whose reputation had imploded. The palace could no longer dismiss the whispers as mere gossip. The web had caught a prince and it wasn't letting go. You picture a hallway in a London townhouse. Beige carpet, floral curtains, a soft light from a lamp in the corner. It looks ordinary, almost dull. Yet one photograph taken in this unremarkable room would become one of the most scrutinized images in royal history. It shows Prince Andrew with his arm around a young Virginia Giuffre, then Virginia Roberts, smiling faintly at the camera. Standing behind them is Ghislaine Maxwell, socialite and longtime Epstein associate. The picture isn't grainy, it isn't staged. It's simple, but its implications are heavy. That photograph first surfaced publicly in 2011, when British tabloids published it alongside Virginia E.'s allegations that Epstein and Maxwell trafficked her to powerful men, including Prince Andrew. Andrew denied the claims, but the photo seemed to speak louder than words. Why, people asked, would a royal be photographed with a girl who later alleged such serious crimes? Andrew has maintained that he has no memory of ever meeting Virginia Giuffre, despite the picture. He once suggested, carefully, publicly, that the photograph might even be doctored. But mainstream fact? Forensic experts who've examined the image have said it appears genuine, with no evidence of tampering. That left Andrew in an awkward position, unable to prove the photo was fake, yet insisting he couldn't recall the moment it was taken. Quirky tidbit. The dress Virginia wore in the photo was later displayed at an exhibition about the scandal. For visitors, it was a strange collision of museum culture and tabloid spectacle, a reminder of how deeply the case had seeped into public imagination. Investigators still question whether the photograph was the turning point. Before it surfaced, Andrew's association with Epstein was damaging but vague. After it, there was a tangible image tying him to a woman who would become one of Epstein's most vocal accusers. The palace scrambled to contain the fallout. Aides whispered about reputational crises. Commentators speculated about whether Andrew could continue public duties. The Queen, who prided herself on the monarchy's resilience, suddenly faced questions about whether one son could imperil the family's image. The image's ordinariness is part of what makes it haunting. You can imagine stumbling across it in a family album, tucked between holiday snapshots. Yet here it was, pinned to headlines, broadcast across the world. Each time it resurfaced, in news stories, documentaries, legal filings, it added fresh weight to Virginia's allegations. And then there's Maxwell, smiling faintly in the background. She would later be convicted in 2021 of sex trafficking and other crimes related to Epstein's U.S. network. Her presence in that photo now reads like foreshadowing, a reminder that the people in the room weren't random party guests, but players in a story that would stretch across decades. For Andrew, the photograph became the image he couldn't outrun. In interviews, in lawsuits, in public discussions, it always returned. Was it real? Was his memory truly blank? Did that faint smile hide more than it showed? The questions lingered, heavier each year. As you sit with the thought, you realize how much power a single image can hold. No scandalous video, no dramatic courtroom scene. Just one flash of a camera in a hallway, freezing forever a moment the prince wished had never existed. You lean closer, almost hearing the rustle of microphones and the shuffle of notes as cameras roll inside a BBC studio. The year is November 2019, and Prince Andrew has agreed to a sit-down interview with journalist Emily Maitlis on the program Newsnight. What should have been a chance to defend his reputation turns into one of the most infamous public relations collapses in modern royal history. The interview begins formally enough. Andrew, seated in a chair at Buckingham Palace, appears calm, hands folded, posture stiff but controlled. Mateless asks about his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein. Andrew tries to explain Epstein had been useful for networking as a trade envoy. He claims he ended the friendship once Epstein's crimes became clear. But then come the sharper questions. Had he stayed at Epstein's New York townhouse after Epstein's 2008 conviction? Yes, Andrew admits, though he calls it the wrong decision. The more he speaks, the worse it sounds. When asked about Virginia Giuffre's allegations, Andrew issues a now infamous line, "I have no recollection of ever meeting this lady." He then insists that one of Giuffre's claims, that he had been sweating profusely during a night at a London nightclub, couldn't to be true. Why? Because, he explained, a medical condition prevented him from sweating at that time, a condition he said developed after the Falklands War. It should have been a clarifying detail. Instead, it became a meme, mocked across social media. Newspapers dubbed it the Pizza Express defense, since Andrew also claimed he couldn't have been with Giuffre that night because he was at a Pizza Express in Woking with his daughter. Quirky tidbit. That particular branch of Pizza Express became an odd tourist spot afterward, with people posing outside as if it were a historic landmark. Investigators still question whether Andrew A.'s decision to do the interview was his own or encouraged by advisors. Either way, the result was catastrophic. The public didn't find his explanations credible. Polls showed a dramatic drop in his favorability, and even longtime supporters called the interview excruciating. Mainstream historical fact. Within days of the broadcast, multiple organizations severed ties with Andrew's charitable work. The University of Huddersfield, where he was chancellor, faced student protests demanding his resignation. Companies withdrew sponsorships from initiatives he fronted. The scandal wasn't just tabloid fodder anymore. It was affecting institutions. The palace realized too late what had happened. The Queen, usually cautious about public relations, was said to be dismayed. By the end of that week, Andrew announced he would step back from royal duties for the foreseeable future. His once busy calendar of trade missions, charity appearances, and official events emptied overnight. You sit with the irony. Andrew had agreed to the interview to save his reputation, to clear the air. Instead, he sealed his fate. The sweating comment, the Pizza Express alibi, the stiff tone, they became shorthand for royal out-of-touchness. What was meant to be a defense turned into a cultural punchline, and yet, beyond the memes, you hear the quieter undercurrent. Survivors of Epstein-Eckes abuse watching a powerful man deny ever meeting one of them, even with a photograph in circulation. For them, the interview wasn't funny. It was infuriating. The lights dim in your mind's eye, the studio closing. Andrew leaves the chair, but the disaster follows him out the door. From that point forward, every step in the scandal feels heavier, because the world has already judged him. Not in court, but on camera. You imagine a thick stack of legal papers sliding across a mahogany desk, the shuffle echoing in a quiet Manhattan law office. It's August 2021, and Virginia Giuffre, one of Jeffrey Epstein's most outspoken accusers, has just filed a civil lawsuit in the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of New York. The defendant named Prince Andrew, Duke of York. For the first time, the scandal isn't just photographs, interviews, or whispers. It's a formal legal filing with the weight of the American justice system behind it. Giuffre alleged that Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell trafficked her when she was 17, and that she was forced into sexual encounters with Andrew in London, New York, and on Epstein's private island. Andrew denied these claims absolutely, insisting he never met her and that the allegations were false. The legal stakes were enormous. While this wasn't a criminal case, the civil lawsuit threatened a public trial, depositions, and the possibility of financial damages. Mainstream fact? The lawsuit was filed under New York's Child Victims Act, which temporarily extended the statute of limitations for survivors of childhood sexual abuse. Giuffre's lawyers used this window to pursue Andrew directly. The court documents described acts committed against Giuffre when she was a minor, allegations that reverberated across the globe. Quirky tidbit? The lawsuit listed Andrew's address not as Buckingham Palace but as Royal Lodge, Windsor, his private residence. Court watchers joked about the surreal image of U.S. Marshals potentially serving papers at the gates of Windsor Great Park, though in reality the legal notice was handled through diplomatic channels. Investigators still question whether Andrew's legal team underestimated the seriousness of the filing. At first, his lawyers tried to have the case dismissed, arguing that a 2009 settlement agreement between Giuffre and Epstein shielded Andrew. That agreement, unsealed in January 2022, showed Epstein had paid Giuffre $500,000 to release any other potential defendants from claims. Andrew's attorney seized on this, but the judge ruled it wasn't enough to protect him from her lawsuit. The case was allowed to proceed. As months passed, legal drama mounted. Each motion, each court filing made headlines. Journalists camped outside U.S. courthouses, waiting for developments. Tabloids speculated about whether Andrew would sit for a deposition. The image of a royal under oath, answering questions about sexual assault, loomed like a thundercloud over the monarchy. Meanwhile, Buckingham Palace distanced itself. Press releases were dry, almost clinical, reminding the public that Andrew acted in a private capacity in legal matters. But behind palace walls, the lawsuit was seen as a constitutional earthquake. The Queen's Platinum Jubilee was approaching in 2022, a celebration of her 70 years on the throne, and now her son faced being dragged into an American courtroom over Epstein. For Andrew, every day brought more pressure. His lawyers fought fiercely, but the possibility of testimony, or even a jury trial, edged closer. Survivor advocates, on the other hand, saw the case as a chance to hold someone powerful accountable, even if only in civil court. You sense the tension, a royal lineage stretching back centuries colliding with the blunt machinery of U.S. law. The gilded world of Windsor met the gritty detail of depositions, evidence lists, and sworn testimony. For once, Andrew's title didn't shield him. In that courtroom, he was just another defendant. And so, by the end of 2021, the world waited. Would the prince take the stand? Would Giuffre testify? Would the Queen's son face trial in America? The ground beneath the monarchy trembled, because the scandal had crossed from whispers into law, and there was no going back. You imagine Buckingham Palace at night, the facade bathed in golden light, Union Jacks fluttering in the chill air. Tourists see majesty, but behind those gates in late 2021 and early 2022, conversations turned anxious. The lawsuit against Prince Andrew wasn't just about him. It was about the entire monarchy. The Queen's Platinum Jubilee loomed, meant to celebrate stability and duty. Instead, scandal hovered like a thundercloud. Inside, courtiers weighed every word. Should Andrew continue using His Royal Highness? Should he keep military titles? Would public outrage spill over to the rest of the family? For an institution built on continuity, even the hint of instability was dangerous. Senior aides described Andrew as radioactive. The Queen, 95 at the time, was still sharp, still steady, but the stress was unmistakable. Mainstream historical fact. In January 2022, Buckingham Palace announced that Andrew would be stripped of his military affiliations and royal patronages, and that he would defend his lawsuit as a private citizen. It was a rare, almost unprecedented move. A monarch cutting formal ties with her own son in order to protect the crown. Quirky tidbit. Around that time, British tabloids ran photos of Andrew horseback riding near Windsor Castle, bundled in a parka, head down. Commentators joked he looked like a man in exile within his own kingdom. The image of a prince hiding under layers of wool became a meme, symbolizing his fall from grace. Investigators still question whether the decision to strip Andrew S. titles was entirely the Queen S. or a consensus reached under pressure from Prince Charles and Prince William. Some reports suggested William was furious about the scandal overshadowing the monarchy. Whatever the dynamic, the symbolism was stark. Andrew was no longer colonel of the Grenadier Guards, no longer fronting charities, no longer visible at royal events. Behind palace walls, the fallout extended beyond titles. Longtime friends and allies distanced themselves. Charities that once welcomed Andrew's patronage scrambled to cut ties, fearing donor backlash. Invitations dried up. Royal watchers noted that Andrew's social calendar, once filled with galas and diplomatic receptions, shrank to almost nothing. You picture the contrast. Grand corridors lined with portraits of kings and queens, yet in private, one royal found himself increasingly alone. Even the palace staff, usually discreet, whispered about how seldom Andrew was seen at public functions. For a family that thrives on visibility, invisibility was its own punishment. And through it all, the lawsuit loomed. Every headline reminded the public. Every documentary replayed the infamous photograph. Every statement from lawyers reignited debate. It was as if the palace walls could no longer insulate Andrew. The outside world had breached them, and reputation, once the monarchy's strongest armor, was crumbling. For the Queen, duty demanded she separate the crown from scandal. For Andrew, that meant stepping into a kind of royal limbo, not exiled, not imprisoned, but stripped of purpose. You sense the loneliness of that role, a prince without patronages, titles, or the respect that once defined him. The palace carried on with pageantry, trooping the color, state visits, jubilee planning, but in quiet rooms one name cast a long shadow, and no matter how many jewels sparkled on the crown, there was no polishing away the tarnish of Epstein's stain. You picture a courtroom in New York, wood-paneled walls, flags standing tall, lawyers shuffling binders across polished desks. But Prince Andrew never sits in that room. Instead, in February 2022, news breaks that the Duke of York has reached an out-of-court settlement with Virginia Giuffre. The trial everyone braced for will never happen. Relief mixes with outrage, and the headlines write themselves. The settlement terms are confidential, but mainstream fact. Andrew agreed to make a substantial donation to Giuffre E.S. charity supporting victims of abuse. Crucially, the legal documents state that there is no admission of liability. In plain terms, Andrew did not admit guilt. He denied the allegations then, and he continued to deny them afterward. Yet the very act of settling, rather than fighting the case to trial, is seen by many as a silent concession. You sense the contradictions. Giuffre's lawyers call it a measure of justice, a vindication of her courage to speak out against someone powerful. Andrew's team presents it as a pragmatic decision, meant to spare the monarchy from further distraction during the Queen's Jubilee year. Both sides declare victory of sorts, but the public reaction is more complicated. Quirky tidbit? Some British bookmakers briefly offered odds on whether Andrew would settle or face trial, treating it like a horse race. Once the settlement was announced, punters joked they had backed the safest bet in history. Investigators still question whether Andrew's decision was truly his own. Royal insiders whispered that the Queen herself may have quietly contributed toward the settlement, drawing from her private Duchy of Lancaster funds. Officially, the palace never confirmed this, but speculation persists. If true, it would mean the monarch paid, indirectly, to protect the institution from her son's scandal. The language of the settlement is careful, almost surgical. It acknowledges Giuffre and Hess suffering as a victim of abuse, without connecting that suffering directly to Andrew. For survivors, this wording stings. Recognition without responsibility. For Andrew, it provides a legal shield, but not a reputational one. Because outside the court, public opinion doesn't care about carefully drafted clauses. Many simply saw a man paying to make accusations go away. You imagine the sigh of relief behind palace walls. No jury trial, no sworn testimony, no photographs of a prince entering a New York courthouse. Yet relief is tinged with bitterness. The scandal isn't erased, it's merely redirected. The photograph still exists. The Newsnight disaster still lives online. And now the narrative hardens. Andrew chose settlement over vindication. Mainstream fact: by March 2022, the lawsuit was formally dismissed after both parties notified the court of the settlement. That's it. Legally, the case was closed, but reputationally, it was just another chapter in decline. As you let the moment sink in, you recognize the paradox of power. A prince could end a lawsuit with money, but not with words, not with proof, not with a clean slate. The silence of a courtroom was replaced by the louder noise of public judgment. And in the end, Andrew stepped deeper into the shadows. Legally free of the lawsuit, but forever bound to the scandal that made him settle without admitting guilt. You picture a formal royal statement, printed on crisp cream paper with Buckingham Palace letterhead. The words are brief but heavy. Prince Andrew is stripped of all military titles and royal patronages. It's January 13, 2022, and the announcement lands like a thunderclap across the United Kingdom. Mainstream historical fact: Andrew loses more than honorary positions. He's no longer Colonel of the Grenadier Guards, no longer patron of dozens of charities. He is also instructed not to use His Royal Highness in any official capacity. The Queen, his mother, approves the move personally. It is as if a velvet curtain has been drawn between Andrew and the public duties of the monarchy. You sense the symbolism. For centuries, military titles have bound the Windsors to the nation's armed forces. Stripping them from Andrew isn't just administrative, it's a public shaming, a reminder that reputation can undo even the most decorated prince. For charities, it means scrambling to find new patrons, sometimes overnight. Many organizations release statements thanking him politely while quietly breathing sighs of relief. Quirky tidbit: the Grenadier Guards officers reportedly expressed discomfort with Andrew continuing as their ceremonial colonel. Some joked darkly that their regimental history, which includes Waterloo and the World Wars, shouldn't also include Newsnight. When the Queen removed Andrew, soldiers at least knew their parades would no longer carry a shadow of scandal. Investigators still question whether the Queen acted entirely on her own or bowed to pressure from Prince Charles and Prince William. Reports suggest William was especially firm, believing the monarchy couldn't afford to let Andrew's scandal bleed into the Jubilee celebrations. Whatever the behind-the-scenes debate, the final outcome was public and final. For Andrew, the loss was profound. His identity had long been tied to military service and royal duty. He served in the Falklands War, flew helicopters under fire, and once took pride in military camaraderie. Now, that chapter closed with a quiet press release. No ceremony, no thanks, just erasure. The palace, always careful with optics, arranged for the announcement to be delivered on the Queen's terms, not dragged out by leaks. Yet the tone was stark. There would be no slow fade, no half measures. Andrew was cut adrift. You imagine him at Royal Lodge, Windsor, pacing the grounds where deer graze and ancient oaks cast long shadows. A prince without titles, a duke without patronages. The silence of exile replacing the fanfare of duty. And beyond the gates, the monarchy carried on. Flags flew, soldiers drilled, preparations for the Platinum Jubilee continued. But the absence was glaring. At ceremonies where Andrew once stood in uniform, there was now an empty space. And in that absence, the monarchy quietly signaled its survival instinct. The crown must endure, even if it meant sacrificing one of its own. You picture a calendar flipping forward, months peeling away like falling leaves. After the lawsuit's settlement in 2022 and the stripping of his titles, Prince Andrew slips into a long, uneasy quiet. From 2023 through 2024, he becomes less a public figure and more a ghost within the royal family. Present in photographs at rare family events, absent from the stage of national life. Mainstream historical fact: Andrew no longer carries out public duties. His appearances are limited to private or strictly family occasions. At the coronation of King Charles III in May 2023, Andrew attends but without military uniform or ceremonial role. Cameras catch him seated discreetly, a reminder of his fall from grace, but no commentator mistakes him for a working royal anymore. The silence extends to charities too. Dozens had already cut ties. Those that remained mostly do so in name only. Andrew's once active diary of patronages is gone, replaced by long stretches of seclusion at Royal Lodge in Windsor Great Park. Newspapers occasionally publish paparazzi shots of him driving through the countryside, sometimes alongside ex-wife Sarah Ferguson, sometimes alone. Quirky tidbit. A British tabloid even nicknamed him the Hermit of Windsor, a mocking title that stuck in online chatter. Investigators still question whether Andrew quietly hoped for a return to public life. Anonymous friends occasionally floated trial balloons in the press, suggesting he deserved a second chance. Yet each time, the response was sharp. Public opinion polls showed overwhelming opposition to his return, and palace aides dismissed the idea outright. Meanwhile, the world's focus shifted. In 2023, attention moved to Charles's reign, Camilla's new role as queen, and William and Catherine stepping further into the spotlight. Andrew faded into the margins. Still, the shadow of scandal lingered. Any article about him inevitably circled back to Epstein and Giuffre, as though his identity were permanently rewritten. You imagine Royal Lodge, ivy on the walls, the sound of horses on nearby bridle paths, the echo of silence in grand rooms. For a man once called Air Miles Andy for his globe-trotting lifestyle, confinement to Windsor feels like exile. The private grounds are beautiful, but the boundaries are invisible walls. The price of scandal is seclusion. Occasionally, Andrew appears at family milestones. He walks behind the Queen's coffin in September 2022, his grief overshadowed by whispers. He's seen at Easter services at Balmoral Summers, but these are cameos, not comebacks. The family tolerates his presence, but the institution keeps him firmly sidelined. By late 2024, the silence feels permanent. Andrew's voice, once broadcast on trade missions and in interviews, rarely reaches the public. His name surfaces in documentaries, podcasts, and late-night jokes, but seldom in palace press releases. A prince reduced to a footnote, even as his story remains one of the most controversial in modern royal history. You picture an April morning in Australia, the kind where sunlight filters through eucalyptus leaves, casting dappled patterns on the ground. But this day in 2025 carries heartbreak. News outlets confirmed that Virginia Giuffre has died at 41. Her passing ruled a suicide. For years, she had been one of the loudest voices exposing Jeffrey Epstein's abuse network and one of the few willing to challenge Prince Andrew directly. Now, her voice is gone, leaving shock and sorrow in its place. Mainstream historical fact: Giuffre's death is widely reported in April 2025. Tributes pour in from survivor advocates who remember her as a fighter, someone who turned personal trauma into public testimony. Her lawsuit against Andrew, settled in 2022, was only part of her work. She had also written, spoken, and campaigned tirelessly for trafficking survivors. Her death becomes a reminder that the toll of abuse doesn't end with court settlements. Quirky tidbit? In the days after her death, mourners left flowers outside a Pizza Express in Woking, a macabre nod to Andrew's infamous alibi. Some left notes thanking her for bravery, others wrote simply, "We believe you." The strange choice of location turned into an impromptu memorial, fusing tragedy with a surreal corner of pop culture. investigators still question whether Giuffre's death will affect the long-term public perception of Andrew's scandal. Some argue that without her, the case loses its central voice. Others believe her absence only deepens the silence, making her photograph with Andrew, that infamous snapshot, even more haunting. The palace issues no statement beyond thoughts and prayers. Andrew himself remains silent, at least publicly. Any comment risks reopening wounds, yet silence fuels speculation. Survivor groups criticize the monarchy for offering condolences without acknowledgement of Giuffre's courage. You sense the cruel symmetry. A woman who spent years fighting to be heard leaves the world in quiet, while the prince whose name she tied to Epstein remains alive, secluded, carrying titles of blood if not of honor. For the public, Giuffre's death underscores how the scandal is about more than reputations. It's about people, their pain, their resilience, their fragility. In remembering her, the world is forced to remember the shadows she illuminated: Epstein's crimes, Maxwell's conviction, Andrew's denials, and the unanswered questions that linger still. The headlines move on within weeks, as they always do, but her absence lingers in every retelling of the saga. The scandal now carries a tragic finality. One accuser silenced by death, one prince silenced by disgrace. You picture a beige government building in Washington, D.C., its windows reflecting a pale morning sky. Inside, a quiet storm brews as the U.S. Department of Justice releases a memo in mid-2025, addressing years of speculation about Jeffrey Epstein's network. Among the names often whispered, one stands taller than most: Prince Andrew, Duke of York. Mainstream historical fact: the memo states bluntly that no evidence has been found linking Andrew to criminal activity in the Epstein case. It emphasizes that despite public fascination with the so-called client list, investigators have identified no document or testimony that proves Andrew engaged in illegal conduct. For the DOJ, this is closure. For the public, it is anything but. The wording of the memo is almost bureaucratic, matter-of-fact, sterile, unemotional, but its implications are seismic. After years of scandal, lawsuits, and relentless headlines, the official word from U.S. authorities is no charges, no case, no trial. Quirky tidbit. Within hours of the memo's release, conspiracy forums lit up with claims that the real list was still hidden. Some even joked that the FBI kept it locked in the same vault as Area 51 secrets. In contrast, late-night comedians used the memo to recycle Andrew's Pizza Express line, proving that public opinion doesn't shift just because paperwork says so. Investigators still question whether the memo represents the end of the road, or simply the limits of what prosecutors were willing or able to pursue. Critics argue that influence, wealth, and secrecy still cloud the truth. Supporters counter that after years of digging, absence of evidence must be taken as evidence of absence. For Andrew, the memo is a bittersweet lifeline. Legally, it is vindication. It means he cannot be charged in the United States for Epstein-related crimes. But reputationally, it does little. People remember images, not memos. They recall the photograph of him with Virginia Giuffre, the disastrous BBC interview, the quiet settlement. Paper cannot erase pixels. You imagine Andrew reading the news from Royal Lodge. Relief, yes, but also futility. He is still stripped of titles, still exiled from public duty, still a figure of mockery. The memo may be law, but it is not redemption. And so, the scandal takes on its final shape: a legal absolution that feels hollow, a public perception that feels permanent. The FBI closes its file. The public keeps it open. You picture the gilded halls of Buckingham Palace, chandeliers casting soft light over portraits of monarchs past. Yet, when you whisper the name Prince Andrew in 2025, the word that follows isn't duty or honor, it's scandal. His story, bound up with Jeffrey Epstein, Virginia Giuffre, and a tangle of legal denials and settlements, leaves a bruise on the monarchy that no crown polish can quite conceal. Mainstream historical fact. Even after the DOJ memo cleared Andrew of criminal charges, his role within the royal family remains frozen. No patronages, no military titles, no return to public duty. He attends family functions quietly, but the pageantry of service is closed to him. His legacy now rests not on his Falkland service nor his charity work of decades past, but on his association with a convicted sex offender. Quirky tidbit. In 2025, a London wax museum quietly removed Andrew's figure from display, citing lack of public relevance. The space was filled instead with King Charles and Queen Camilla. Tourists noticed the absence more than the replacement, snapping photos of the blank spot where a prince once stood in wax, now erased in effigy. Investigators still question whether the monarchy will ever rehabilitate Andrew's image. Some suggest history may soften as new scandals emerge elsewhere, but others believe his name is permanently etched into the darker side of royal history. The unanswered questions about flights on Epstein's jet, about the infamous photograph, about his choices, linger in the margins of every headline. You sense the generational divide. For older Britons, Andrew is remembered as the Queen's spare, the daring helicopter pilot of the Falklands War. For younger audiences, he is the prince of Pizza Express memes, the man whose reputation collapsed on live television. Legacy is rarely fair, but it is always shaped by what sticks in the collective imagination. By the autumn of 2025, one thing is clear. Andrew's scandal didn't destroy the monarchy, but it altered it. It forced the crown to act decisively, stripping titles and cutting ties, proving the institution's survival instinct is stronger than family loyalty. It also cast a lasting shadow over royal mystique, showing how even gilded palaces cannot insulate against modern accountability or modern ridicule. In the end, Andrew remains where he has been for years now, alive, legally uncharged but reputationally diminished. The world remembers him not as a working royal, but as a cautionary tale. His legacy is scandal, and scandal has a way of echoing louder than silence. So here you are, at the quiet close of a story that winds through palaces and courtrooms, television studios, and tabloid headlines. UEV followed Prince Andrew Ainseth's journey, from Falklands pilot to scandal-ridden exile, all tied to the dark orbit of Jeffrey Epstein. The tale was never about royalty alone. It was about power, accountability, and the voices of victims who dared to speak against privilege. Now, as the night deepens, let yourself step back. Imagine the ticking of an antique clock in a silent hall. The scandal is written into history, but tonight, you don't need to carry its weight. You've listened, you've witnessed, and now you can let the noise fade. On this channel, 102 Hours, stories like this one unfold not to sensationalize, but to remind you of the delicate balance between truth and perception, silence and speech. As always, you are invited to leave a whisper of where you're listening from and what time the night finds you. Perhaps your words join those of others across oceans, forming a quiet community of listeners who seek truth in the hush of late hours. Let your breath slow now. The prince, the scandal, the courtrooms, the headlines, they all dim like lamps switched off one by one. What lingers is calm, and the certainty that tomorrow's world will bring new mysteries, new questions, and perhaps even new answers. For now, close your eyes to the echo of scandal and the weight of history. Drift toward sleep with the knowledge that you've stayed curious, stayed thoughtful, and stayed awake just long enough.